So we're in the House of Lords on Friday when it's not sitting, and we've sneaked out into the rather grungy hidden smoking area. So if you think this isn't posh, but this is parliamentary state, and maybe you can just we aren't genuinely here, but we're hidden. Anyway, hello, this week inside the Lords. A couple of things that I wanted to say this week. First of all, an extraordinary thing happened, which I think sometimes I'm so busy slagging off the House of Lords I forget to say positive things, but a really good thing happened, which was that Baroness Tina Stowell and Lord Michael Forsyth and others got together to put an amendment in to a rather obscure bill in some ways, about saying that foreign states should not be able to own UK media. It wasn't about foreign ownership, it wasn't kind of like a protectionist measure. And the reason why that's extraordinary was because everybody has tried to stop them doing this, and they just found ways of raising this very important issue. Why is that important is because there's been an attempt by a foreign state to buy the Telegraph, the Daily Telegraph and the Sunday Telegraph and the Spectator magazine. And to be honest with you, it's one thing, anyone can own a newspaper, no one's trying to pretend, but once a foreign state owns it, that's going to be a big deal. And the person they had fronting it in terms of editorial control was somebody who, let's put it this way, don't associate with the values we might associate with the free-thinking Telegraph and so on. Anyway, the reason why this was good was that they found a way of putting an amendment forward. They then got cross-party support. People in the House of Lords who hate the Telegraph and hate the Spectator, but they understood the principle. They all backed Baroness Stowell's amendment, and just as she was about to announce it, the government preempted it by announcing they're going to ban the foreign state ownership of media. In other words, they knew this was coming. So I do think that Tina Stowell should be congratulated, and the others who did this, but also you can actually make a little difference. Maybe a bit more depressingly, I was involved in a debate earlier this week, an important debate for me, which was on the imprisonment of prison. It's called IPPs, and it's imprisonment for public protection. You think with that title that would mean that the public are going to be protected by these sentences. We wrote about this in the Substack last week, so I'm not going to go into all the details, and you can have a look at my speech below to get a bit more from it. But just to note, there was lots of great amendments being put forward to improve the plight of people who are imprisoned for public protection. And just to note, that's a misnomer. The sentence is so draconian that it's been abolished, and everybody agrees it should be abolished. And it was abolished in 2012, but one of those things where nobody wants to sort out the final parts of it. So there's been lots of really good amendments, cross-party group of people, even David Blunkett, and I think this is very brave of him, who brought in the sentence. Instead, I made a terrible mistake. I was part of some law and order crackdown under New Labour, but actually it was a bit performative, and this is backfired, and it's not even catching the real problem people. And people, it's a great injustice, similar to the post office scandal. I, however, had what might be described as the amendment that was for resentencing these prisoners, which I knew that both the government and the Labour Party would disagree with, and in a way it was kind of like the lunatic amendment. What I mean is nobody agreed with it. All of the IPP prisoners agreed with it, all their families. And I gave the longest speech that I've ever given in the House of Lords, but it's important that you understand why. Because of the hopelessness of these prisoners, who may well have been inside for stealing a bicycle or having a fight on the street or doing something which they got maybe 4 years for, and they all say, you know, fair dues, right? They might well be in for 20 years without it ever looking like it's going to end. Can you imagine the hopelessness and this sort of thing you associate with authoritarian regimes, right? So such is the despair that when there's a possibility that they might be able to get out through a resentencing motion in Parliament, when then it's scuppered, a lot of them lose hope, and I'm afraid take their own lives. And there's been a huge number of people who've taken their own lives on IPPs. So usually I'm against people saying suicide, you know, and threats of suicide. This is a real one. So can you imagine how nervous I was? I didn't sleep the night before because I was so worried that I'd let down the families, and I wanted to manage their expectations and say, look, it's not going to get through, but I want to make the arguments anyway. So I did the speech. I was very anxious, and it seems, at least luckily, that the families and the prisoners were happy with what I argued. But I also think that that's another thing that you can do in the House of Lords, which is you can make sure that you keep making the arguments, and eventually Parliament has to listen. But the credit goes to all of those campaigners who ensure that on important issues that parliamentarians are forced to be brave, to say things that they don't want to say. And I also think that although unlike Baroness Stowell and media ownership, I didn't win anything, I do think that people like Daniel Moylan, who's been fantastic, David Blunkett, and various others, actually Baroness Burt, the person from the Lib Dems who put forward the conversion therapy bill, who we disagree on everything else, but was absolutely fantastic on IPPs. I think when people get together and say, no, this is more important, that's a fair enough use of the parliamentary time that we have on these discussions. And I do think that maybe the front bench from Labour moved a little bit, even though they're sort of cowardly. They don't want to be seen to be soft on law and order, and the government also are forced to listen. So that's on that. The third thing I wanted to just talk about was the media. And the reason I wanted to do this was because there was a short debate organised on Thursday. One of these debates that they give it an hour. It's a kind of a bit of a, it's got no legislative impact, and I knew as it was being put forward by a particular group of peers that are associated with Hacked Off, that it was likely to be it was about regulation of broadcasting, and I guessed that its entire purpose was to slag off GB News. So I put my name down because I really do think that we, in the spirit of the way that we discuss saving the Telegraph, even if you don't read it, you know that media press freedom is important. I wanted to urge the argument for media plurality and expose the double standards. So I spoke on that debate, and it's just quite interesting because it's only a short debate. You can see the discussion below, but the kind of sectarianism set in, which was that people just, I mean, literally calling to close down GB News. It's calling on Ofcom, you know, not calling for it to be shut down, but basically to be regulated out of existence. But the reason I mention that is for two reasons. Might not be of any great significance, but I was on the Politics Live exactly before I got involved in that debate, and there was a genuinely interesting argument and discussion about the extremism clauses being brought in by Michael Gove, whether in fact this is going to be bad for free speech. I felt as though that discussion really was, some quality exchanges were occurred. I was allowed, given free rein, to be able to talk about the problems of Islamism, which I think the extremism measures are just being used to cover up the real problems we're facing. But it's a difficult argument, and you know, I was nervous I'd be called a racist, but I have to give credit to the BBC for allowing that discussion to happen. They did allow it, and I was allowed to say what I wanted. In contrast, Thursday night, question time, before actually she'd opened her mouth and said a word, Melanie Phillips was announced as one speaker, and she was trending all day with an attempt to say she should not be allowed on the panel because of her pro-Israel views, and the way she was treated by both the audience and subsequently on social media has been so disgusting. And I do just want to put a plea here for, if you're going to say media plurality and press freedom and so on, you have to mean it. And that means listening to, putting up with views that you don't like. And I say that to GB News as well as I say it to the BBC. I think that BBC Politics Live does it well. I think most BBC political programmes don't. They assume that their outlook is the right one, and they don't even understand what issues they're leaving out by omission, for example. But anyway, I'm not going to go about that. The reason why we are here on Friday, when House of Lords is closed, apart from staff of course working, is because we've got 5 schools I think here today involved in a debating competition called Debating Matters, and hearing 16, 17-year-olds from 6 forms across the country coming here and arguing over the rights and wrongs of cancel culture. There's been a fantastic debate on whether billionaires owning media organisations will distort the media. It's bad for democracy. And whether for the final topic is whether cultural artefacts should be returned, such as the Elgin marbles. And the students are forced to think of the best arguments they can put forward. They're cross-examined by a bunch of judges who really give them a hard time. Some of them are from the House of Lords, some of them are expert guests, some of them are, you know, big-time lawyers who are used to cross-examining people, and the 16 and 17-year-olds have to rise to the occasion. But the one thing that Debating Matters, which is a fantastic educational charity, forces those young people to do, and is why it exists, is to say there's always more than one side to an argument. You know what I mean? That you should never do what's been done to Melanie Phillips, which is demonise somebody and say you don't want to hear their arguments. Not use ad hominem attacks on people. Not try and get them cancelled before they've opened their mouths. And what we need is more discussion, more debate, and I'm glad that the House of Lords in the chamber itself doesn't always live up to the idea of a great debating chamber. This week it sort of has, and I'm very glad that they're committed to encouraging young people to debate and have invited Debating Matters here today.